Hey guys, tonight we're going to keep quiet company with a single ordinary day that would end up remembered longer than almost any other. The last day of Pompeii followed gently, hour by hour, from a calm morning to an evening that would change everything. Before we begin, if you find something restful in these slow wanderings through the past, you might think about leaving a like and subscribing, though only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, down in the comments, where in the world you're listening from and what the hour is where you are right now. It's always a small marvel to picture how many places, across so many time zones, are gathered together in one story like this. So let us step softly back across nearly 2,000 years to a city on the Bay of Naples in the warm late summer of the year 79 AD, where a morning is about to begin exactly like every morning before it. The city stirs the way it always has, unhurried, untroubled, and, most tenderly of all, entirely unaware that it is waking for the final time. A soft, pale light spreads across Pompeii, sliding over tiled rooftops and down into the narrow lanes still cool from the departed night. The morning air holds its familiar mixture of scents: bread in the oven, damp stone, olive oil, and the faint, ever-present breath of the sea. Inside his bakery, Marcus Lucretius is already at his labour, moving with the easy sureness of long habit, his hands pale with flour as he slides the loaves into a clay oven that glows like a small, contained sun. The heat presses against his face, but he scarcely feels it anymore. This is routine. This is the shape of an ordinary life. Outside his door, a short line has already gathered, early customers who believe, quite reasonably, that today will unfold like all the days that came before it. Not far away, within a spacious villa, Julia Felix steps out into her courtyard. A fountain murmurs softly, catching threads of the new light. Around her, servants move quietly, sweeping, trimming, tidying. She pauses over a cluster of flowers with a faint dissatisfaction, something about them not quite right, not enough to trouble her, only enough to draw the smallest frown. Out in the streets, the day is beginning to find its rhythm. A knot of children runs past, laughing a little too loudly, their sandals slapping against the paving stones. A vendor arranges his fruit with the sort of care usually saved for an offering to the gods. Somewhere close by, a dog begins to bark, then another answers, and then several more, as though something unseen has drifted through the city and spoken to them in a language only they can follow. Most people pay it no mind, for the gentle art of overlooking small, uneasy details is one of humanity's oldest talents. Above it all, Mount Vesuvius stands calmly against the sky. Its slopes are green, almost welcoming. No smoke rises, no fire shows, nothing at all to remark upon, only a mountain like any other, keeping watch over a city that trusts it completely. And why should they not? It has been silent for generations, harmless and predictable, a familiar shape on the horizon. The streets grow fuller, the voices warmer, the ordinary music of daily life settling comfortably into place. Bread will be sold, bargains will be struck, meals will be shared, plans will be kept. And not a single soul among them, not Marcus, not Julia, not anyone at all, has the faintest sense that by nightfall none of it will remain as it was. For the mountain is not sleeping, it is only waiting. At first there is nothing worth pausing over. A faint tremor passes beneath the city, so slight that many never feel it at all. Those who do simply stop for a heartbeat, glance about, and carry on. Here the ground has long had a habit of shifting now and then, the way an old man settles himself in his chair, a little uncomfortable perhaps, but hardly a cause for alarm. In a shaded dining room, Publius Cornelius steadies a cup of watered wine as it trembles against the tabletop. The surface ripples, then grows smooth again. He frowns briefly, then lets out a slow breath through his nose. "Another one," he murmurs, more put out than worried. Across from him, his wife scarcely lifts her eyes. The conversation resumes. Bread is broken. Life goes on, because life always insists upon going on. Outside, though, the city has begun to behave a little differently. A flock of pigeons bursts suddenly into the air, scattering with no clear direction, and does not settle again. A mule plants its hooves stubbornly and refuses to take another step, while its owner tugs at the reins and mutters in frustration. The dogs no longer bark in bursts, but almost without pause now, as if something unseen is circling just beyond the edge of what people can perceive. Near the marketplace, Flavia Sabina stops mid-step. She tilts her head, listening. The usual sounds are all there. Voices, footfalls, distant laughter. Yet something beneath them feels thin and hollow, as though the city has drawn a shallow breath and forgotten to release it. She shakes off the feeling. There are errands to see to, and no time to indulge a vague unease. High above, Mount Vesuvius stays exactly as it was, quiet and still, its slopes resting in the light, betraying nothing of what is slowly gathering within it. No smoke signals danger. No rumble carries a warning. To all appearances, it is the most innocent thing in the world. And that, in the end, is precisely the trouble, for danger, when it does arrive, rarely announces itself in advance. In the streets, people keep to their routines with a quiet, stubborn confidence. Shopkeepers call out to passers-by. Servants carry water and goods from one end of the city to the other. Two men argue loudly over the price of olives, each entirely certain the other is a swindler of remarkable cunning. It might almost be amusing were it not unfolding on the edge of something none of them can see. The tremors return, a little firmer this time. A hanging lamp sways gently. A soft fall of dust drifts from a ceiling beam. Again people pause. Again they let it go, because to admit the pattern would be to admit something far heavier than mere inconvenience. The city presses onward with the calm insistence of habit, comforted by the old and gentle illusion that a life once begun cannot simply stop without warning. At the Forum, the heart of Pompeii is beating loudly. Merchants call over one another, each half convinced that volume is a kind of persuasion. Coins clink, hands gesture, bargains rise and fall in a matter of minutes. Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, one of the city's wealthier men, stands near his stall inspecting the amphorae of his prized garum, the sharp, fermented scent of the fish sauce hanging in the warm air. He speaks with the easy authority of a man who has never had to imagine losing everything in the space of a single afternoon, for profit feels permanent to those who have never watched it vanish. Nearby, Quintus Fadius, a schoolteacher, works to keep order among a cluster of restless boys, reciting lines, correcting their pronunciation, insisting on discipline. One child gazes through an open doorway toward the sky, distracted by something he cannot quite name. Quintus notices and follows the boy's eyes. For a moment, he says nothing at all. Then, with quiet resolve, he returns to the lesson. Structure must be kept, he seems to feel, even when the world begins to grow uncertain. In another part of the city, Flavia Sabina at last chooses a piece of jewellery. She turns it in her hands, watching the way the light plays across its surface, and it pleases her. She smiles faintly, unaware that this small satisfaction will be among the last of her untroubled thoughts. The tremors continue, subtle but persistent now. A jar shifts a little upon its shelf. A hanging curtain stirs, though there is no wind. Conversations halt for a single heartbeat, then resume with a slightly forced ease. No one wishes to be the first to say it aloud, because to name a thing is to make it real. Above them, the mountain remains deceptively calm, its silence no longer a comfort, but a weight, like a held breath stretched a moment too long. The animals feel no such hesitation. A horse breaks free of its tether and bolts down a side street. A group of dogs whines and pulls away from their owners. Even the insects seem fewer, their steady hum thinning into something almost noticeable by its absence. And still the city carries on. Bread is sold, lessons are taught, jewelry is chosen. For routine is a powerful thing, and it whispers to everyone that tomorrow is certain. Slowly, the city begins to feel different, not dramatically, not in any way that demands action, but in the quiet, creeping manner of a discomfort that settles into the body and will not leave. The air grows heavier, not merely warm but thick, as though each breath asks for a little more effort than it should. In the public baths, where heat and steam are nothing unusual, even the regulars start to sense the change. Titus Fibius, a soldier lately returned from service, leans against a marble wall as the sweat gathers faster than it ought to. He breathes out slowly, studying the room. "This isn't right," he says, more to himself than to anyone else. Around him, the other men laugh it away. One blames the late summer sun, another blames poor ventilation. A third, plainly unwilling to think too deeply about it, blames the gods in that vague, convenient way people reach for when they do not truly want an answer. The talk goes on, but it feels thinner now, stretched over an unease no one wishes to name. Outside, the streets shimmer faintly beneath the rising heat. The usual breeze from the sea has faded, leaving the air still and heavy, and even the ordinary sounds of the city seem muffled, as if absorbed by something unseen. In a small courtyard, Livia Drusilla sits in the shade while a young servant fans her gently. She lifts a hand and signals the girl to stop. For a moment, the air is completely motionless. No wind, no movement, only a silence pressing in from every side. Livia looks up, not toward anything in particular, only up, as though an answer might be written somewhere above her. There is nothing there but the quiet presence of Mount Vesuvius, watching as it always has, unchanged in shape and unchanged in bearing, a perfect disguise for something that is anything but calm. Elsewhere, the small signs keep gathering. A clay cup cracks suddenly in the heat, splitting with a sharp sound that makes its owner flinch. A line of ants breaks apart and scatters in uneven paths. A fountain that had run steadily sputters for a moment before righting itself. On their own, each of these means nothing. Together, they begin to form a pattern. But a pattern needs someone willing to stop, step back, and admit that what they are seeing no longer fits the ordinary shape of things. Pompeii is not there yet, and still it grows harder to ignore. Not because anything sudden has happened. Nothing has broken, nothing has fallen, but because the scattered small signs have gathered into something heavier, something that lingers. The animals feel it most keenly. In a narrow side street, a mule refuses to move, its muscles locked, its eyes wide, its breath coming too quickly, while its owner pulls harder on the rein and his voice rises from irritation toward anger. But the creature will not obey. It only stands there, trembling, as if rooted to the earth itself. Close by, a group of dogs begins to howl, not barking, not reacting to anything anyone can see, but howling in long, drawn-out notes that seem to stretch across the whole city, a sound that unsettles people in a way they cannot quite explain, because it does not sound like a warning. It sounds like morning. In her villa, Livia Drusilla rises and begins to pace slowly across the courtyard. The silence closes in again, heavier than before, until even the fountain, once a gentle background comfort, feels too loud in the stillness. She stops and listens. Nothing is out of place, and yet everything feels wrong. Across town, Marcus Lucretius pauses at his work. The ovens burn as they always do, but the heat seems sharper now, almost insistent. He wipes the sweat from his brow and glances toward the doorway, where a thin layer of dust has begun to settle along the threshold. He frowns. Dust is ordinary enough. This much dust without any wind is less so. Still he says nothing, for there are customers waiting, and bread does not bake itself. At the Forum, the conversations have shifted. The familiar quarrels over price and quality are shorter now, broken by glances toward the sky, toward the ground, toward anything that might offer an explanation. No one has one. Above them, Mount Vesuvius remains outwardly unchanged, calm and silent and almost indifferent. An impressive performance, for beneath that stillness the pressure goes on building, unseen and unheard. And then a faint tremor rolls through the city once more. Firmer this time, not enough to do any harm, but enough for everyone to feel it. Cups rattle. Doors shift a little in their frames. A few people catch their breath, then quickly recover, brushing it away with a confidence they are working harder now to hold. It is nothing, someone says, and the others around him nod, because agreement is easier than doubt. To doubt would be to follow the thought somewhere unwelcome. To admit that something is wrong would be to admit, too, that it might not be within their power to set it right. So the city does not halt. It only slows ever so slightly. And in that small hesitation, a quiet unease finds room to settle. It is patient. It grows with each passing moment. And Pompeii, for as long as it can, decides not to listen. When the moment finally comes, it comes with no warning at all, and yet, looking back, it seems it could have been nothing else. It begins as a sound. Not a rumble, not a sharp report, but something lower and vaster than either. A long, tearing roar that seems to open the sky from one edge to the other. It does not travel across the city the way ordinary noise does. It falls upon it whole and sudden, leaving no space for anyone to mistake its meaning. Every voice breaks off at once. Every gesture holds still for the length of a single heartbeat. The whole of Pompeii seems to draw one breath and keep it. Then the city lifts its eyes. Above Mount Vesuvius the sky is no longer bare. A great column of ash and smoke is climbing, and climbing quickly, faster than climbing should be, reaching upward like a dark tree pressed into the heavens against its will. It widens as it rises, thick and strange, taking the clear blue into itself with an ease that seems almost intended. For a long moment no one moves, because the mind falters before a thing it has no name for. Quintus Fabius, standing just beyond the edge of the Forum, gazes up with his lips a little parted. His students gather at his back, and their usual liveliness is gone, replaced now by something quieter and more watchful. "What is that?" one of them asks, hardly above a breath. Quintus gives no answer, because he has none to give. On the far side of the streets, Flavia Sabina comes out into the open, one hand raised to shade her eyes as she turns toward the mountain. The shape overhead grows taller, darker, sharper against the light with every heartbeat. It is no longer far away. It is no longer some idea to be turned over calmly. It is real, and it is unfolding now before them all. Then the ground moves again, and harder this time. Not a faint shiver, but a single heavy lurch. Beams groan. roof tiles slide from their places. A crack travels along a plastered wall and ends in one small final sound. Somewhere a person cries out. And it is this, not the roar, not the rising column, that at last breaks the stillness. The scream. Because fear, once it is spoken aloud, carries further and faster than anything else can. People begin to stir. Some ease a few steps backward. Others turn and walk, then walk more quickly, then find themselves moving faster still without quite knowing why. And then, gently at first, it begins to come down. Fine ash, drifting from above like a soft grey snow. It gathers in hair, along shoulders, across the paving stones, so light and so quiet that it seems almost kind. A few brush it away, more puzzled than troubled. Marcus Lucretius, standing in the doorway of his bakery, holds out an open hand. The ash settles into his palm, weightless and pale. He studies it. For that one moment it looks like nothing that could ever harm anyone. Almost. But high above, the column keeps rising, darkening, thickening, spreading wider across the day. This is not a passing thing that will blow over by evening. This is a beginning, and Pompeii at last can no longer tell itself otherwise. The ash keeps falling. At first it is nearly delicate, soft grains coming to rest on the rooftops, drifting into the open courtyards, catching in hair and in the folds of cloth like a visitor who is unwelcome, yet oddly gentle. People wipe it away out of habit, as though it were only dust carried on some odd little wind. But no wind comes. The air stays still and heavy. In the street before his oven, Marcus Lucretius steps out once more and looks up. The sky has lost its blue. It has taken on a flat, dull grey, as if a veil had been drawn slowly across it. He narrows his eyes, trying to make sense of the shape above Vesuvius, but its size refuses to be understood. It is too large, too swift, too far outside anything he has known. So his mind does what minds so often do before the impossible. It makes the thing smaller. It will pass, he says aloud, though no one has asked him. A customer close by nods at once, glad of the excuse. Only ash, the man adds. Such things happen. Neither of them wholly believes it, but belief is not always what is needed. Sometimes only repetition is. Across the city, the same quiet denial takes hold, house by house. In the Forum, the merchant Aulus Umbricius Scaurus orders his workers to keep loading the amphorae. Business cannot be allowed to stop. It must not stop. Livelihood depends on things carrying on, not on alarm. He brushes ash from his shoulder with plain irritation, as though more offended by the inconvenience than concerned by its source. Not far off, Flavia Sabina falters in the middle of the street, holding her small jewellery box a little tighter now. The ash comes down more thickly, gathering in her hair, catching in the pleats of her clothes. She looks about her, searching for someone, anyone, who seems certain of what to do. There is no such person. There are only people pretending. The tremors continue, stronger now, and closer together. Doors rattle in their frames. A loose tile slits from a roof and breaks against the stone below, startling those nearby into little cries. For a moment the pretense gives way. Voices rise. Questions form. But before they can harden into anything resembling a plan, they are set aside again, smoothed over by habit, by routine, by the simple longing for the ordinary to return. Because to accept what is happening would mean changing everything at once. And change, especially the urgent kind, is something people resist with remarkable steadiness. So they carry on. The shops stay open. Conversations go on, though shorter now and more distracted. People move through the streets with quicker steps and glance more often at the sky. The ash grows deeper, the light dims further. And still, so many choose to believe this is only for a while, that it will stop, that surely it must stop, because the other possibility, that this is only the beginning, is far too large to take in all at once. And Pompeii, even now, is trying very hard not to take it in at all. When the change comes, it comes suddenly. Denial does not fade away by degrees. It breaks. The ash is no longer soft, no longer occasional. It falls steadily, thicker and heavier, laying a grey blanket over the streets that muffles every footstep and drains the colour from everything. What was an inconvenience has become an obstacle. Breathing itself feels different now. The air rasps at the throat, and people begin to understand. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. In the forum, voices rise again, no longer in argument but in confusion. Questions overlap and collide and go unanswered. One person shouts that they should leave the city. Another insists it is safer to stay behind walls. A third demands to know who is in charge, as if any official could reason with a mountain. No one is in charge. Not here. Not any longer. Flavia Sabina presses through the crowd, the jewellery box held against her chest. It feels heavier now, less a treasure than a weight. All around her, people move faster, jostling one another, letting go of the careful courtesies that used to govern these streets. Fear undoes manners quickly. Nearby, Aulus Umbricius Scaurus has stopped thinking of profit at all. His workers hesitate, watching him for some sign of what to do. He opens his mouth to speak, then closes it again. For perhaps the first time in many years, he has nothing useful to offer them. Above it all, Vesuvius continues without pause. The column of ash spreads wider and darker, blotting out more and more of the sky. Now and then a flash ripples somewhere within it, a brief flicker of lightning buried deep in the cloud. It no longer seems far away. It feels near. Too near. The ground shudders again, harder than before. A stretch of wall cracks and gives way, sending a gust of dust into the already thickened air. People cry out, not one lone voice this time, but many at once, layered and urgent. And now no one pretends it is nothing. At the mouth of a narrow street, Titus Vibius tries to bring some order. His voice carries through the confusion, steady and firm, telling people to keep moving, to stay together, to think clearly. A few listen. Many do not. Alarm does not answer well to instruction. It travels faster than reason, faster than any effort to hold it in check. The ash keeps falling, heavier still, settling on the rooftops and pressing down on them, adding weight where the beams were never meant to bear it. Doors grow harder to open. The lanes begin to vanish beneath the deepening grey. The city, once so open and familiar, starts to fold in upon itself. And now, at last, movement turns urgent rather than cautious. People begin to run, because whatever this is, whatever has begun, it is no longer something they can simply wait out. It is something they must leave behind, or try to. The light fades with an unnatural quickness. What ought to be a bright midday becomes a dim grey dusk. Shadows lengthen where no shadows should be. Colour drains from the streets, giving way to the dull sameness of ash. Then, slowly, the grey deepens toward black. Not the black of night, but something heavier, a darkness that seems to press close and swallow distance and depth until the city itself begins to disappear into it. Torches are lit, a few at first, small uncertain flames trembling in doorways and along the edges of the streets. Then more and more, until Pompeii glows faintly beneath a scattered constellation of little fires, each one a fragile answer to something far larger than itself. It is not enough. The darkness keeps on coming. Inside his home, Publius Cornelius gathers his family close. The room is dim in spite of the lamps, their small lights struggling against the thickening air. Ash slips in through every open space, settling on the floor, the furniture, their clothes. His wife holds his arm. "We have to go," she says. He hesitates, not because he disagrees, but because he no longer knows where going would lead. Out into what? The streets are already crowded. The sky offers no direction. The mountain stands hidden somewhere behind the growing mass of ash and smoke. Every choice feels uncertain, and every moment of waiting feels dangerous. In the streets, movement becomes tangled and confused. People pass one another as little more than outlines in the dark. Voices call out names of children, of husbands and wives, of friends. Some are answered, many are not. Somewhere close a child is crying, the sound thin and lost in the heavy air. Across the town, Livia Drusilla steps out from her villa, guided by a servant holding a wavering torch. The flame bends and shivers, barely keeping itself alive. She looks toward where the city ought to be and sees almost nothing, only shifting shapes, drifting shadows, brief glints of firelight caught on falling ash. And above them all, unseen now but present still, Vesuvius goes on with its work. The mountain feeds the sky, and the sky feeds the darkness, until the line between the earth and the air begins to dissolve. Another tremor rolls through the ground, longer this time, the kind that does not end quickly, but makes everyone feel each slow second of it. Walls creak, structures strain. Somewhere in the distance, something settles with a deep and final sound. The city is changing, no longer slowly but swiftly, and there is no turning it back. Breathing grows harder. Each breath carries dust, dry and choking, and people cover their mouths with cloth, with their hands, with whatever they can find. It helps a little. It is not enough. Nothing is enough. And now the question is no longer whether something is wrong. The question is whether anyone can still find their way out, or whether Pompeii has become a place that holds people rather than shelters them. Its weight becomes impossible to ignore. The ash no longer drifts. It comes down with purpose, thick and steady, gathering on the rooftops in heavy layers. What looked like dust now behaves like stone in waiting, pressing down with a force the buildings were never built to hold. The first roof to give way goes suddenly, a sharp crack followed by the low grinding of timber and tile letting go, and a cloud of ash bursts outward into the crowded street. People cry out, no longer in confusion, but in recognition. This is happening, and it is not going to stop. Along a narrow lane, Titus Fabius moves quickly, his voice cutting through the noise. He waves people toward the open spaces, away from the walls that may not stand much longer. "Keep moving," he calls. "Stay clear of the houses." Some obey, stumbling past him, holding children close, carrying what little they could gather, coughing as they go. Others cannot bring themselves to leave whatever shelter they have, even as that shelter begins to fail, because stepping into the open feels like stepping into the unknown, and the unknown, at least in the mind, can always seem worse. Above them, hidden behind the darkened sky, Vesuvius feeds the storm without pause. The ash grows denser, falling faster, coating all it touches. Doorways clog. Paths narrow. The city loses its familiar lines, its shape softened and buried beneath the rising grey. Inside what is left of his bakery, Marcus Lucretius tries to save what he can. He wraps loaves in cloth, his hands quick and almost frantic now. The heat of the oven mingles with the heavy air until the small room can hardly be borne. A crash sounds somewhere beyond the walls, then another, closer. He stops and listens. Above him the building groans softly. For a moment he thinks of staying, of guarding what is his work, his craft, his place among these streets, and that stubborn instinct pulls at him with a quiet and human insistence. A wooden beam shifts overhead with a dry, splintering sound, and that small warning is enough to settle the matter. He sets down everything he was holding and turns toward the doorway, moving out into a street that seems narrower now, dimmer, and far less certain than it had been only hours before. All across Pompeii, that same quiet decision is being reached at the very same moment. For a few, it comes just in time. For others, it arrives too late. And for many, there is no clear choice left to make at all. The collapses continue one after another, each one sending a fresh tremor of alarm through a crowd that was already frightened. Buildings that had stood for decades give way in a matter of minutes, folding under a weight that no one had ever thought to prepare for. The city is not merely enduring some passing storm. It is being covered over, layer upon layer, breath by breath, beneath something that will not lift, will not pause, and will not leave anything untouched. Movement becomes the only instinct that still makes sense. The streets, so orderly and familiar the day before, are now filled with people pressing in every direction, each of them following the same fragile hope: to get away. Not toward safety, not toward any certainty, only toward distance, away from the city, away from whatever it has become. Julia Felix steps out from what remains of her estate, her composure shaken but not entirely lost. Her servants gather close around her, some carrying bundles, others carrying nothing at all. The gates that once marked the edge of her fortune feel meaningless now. Walls offer no shelter from falling ash. Nothing does. She hesitates only for a breath before moving ahead, folding into the current of people flowing toward the outskirts of the town. Around her, the old boundaries between ranks have quietly dissolved. Wealthy and poor walk side by side, all of them dusted alike, all of them equally unsure of what lies ahead. Fear, it turns out, is remarkably good at making everyone the same. The roads leading out begin to thicken with movement. People stumble across uneven ground that now lies hidden beneath drifts of ash. Sandals slide. Visibility keeps narrowing. Torches burn faintly, their glow all but swallowed by the heavy air. Simply breathing becomes work. Each inhale pulls in fine, dry grit that scrapes at the throat. People wrap cloth across their mouths, press their sleeves to their faces, anything to strain the air a little. It helps, though only a little, never quite enough to make the going easy. Somewhere in the crowd, Publius Cornelius holds his son's hand tightly, refusing to loosen his grip, even as the crowd presses in from every side. His wife keeps close behind him, coughing, her steps beginning to slow. He glances back once, then fixes his eyes forward again. There is no time to pause. To stop would be to fall behind, to slip away into the confusion left in their wake. High above, unseen yet always present, Mount Vesuvius goes on feeding the day. The ash grows thicker still, falling faster and heavier, turning the world into something harder and harder to recognize. The edges of the city blur. Familiar corners vanish. Even the direction of escape grows uncertain. Some turn back, lost and disoriented. Others push blindly forward, trusting motion over thought. A few sink down along the way and do not rise, gently overtaken by the drifting weight around them. The sound of the city has changed as well. It is no longer the layered hum of ordinary life, but a shifting mixture of coughing, calling voices, footsteps, and the muffled fall of distant walls. It is louder somehow, and emptier at the same time, stripped of anything that once felt like home. And still they move, because staying is no longer possible, because the place behind them is no longer a place to live. It has become something else now, something drawing in around them, something that does not give back what it takes. With every step, the hope of escape grows a little thinner, not because anyone stops believing in it, but because the world is changing faster than any of them can move. Then darkness takes the city completely. Not slowly, not with the gentle fading of an evening, but all at once, thick and heavy and total. It closes in from every side, swallowing what little sight remains until the world shrinks to the length of an outstretched arm. The torches falter, their flames bending low under the weight of ash and the thinning air. Light no longer spreads outward. It clings close and small, barely reaching the faces of those who carry it. Beyond that narrow ring there is nothing but black. In the streets, people move by feel now. Not running, for running needs a direction. This is something quieter, a slow and uncertain forward drift, guided by memory, by instinct, by the faint hope that each step leads somewhere better than the last. Often, it does not. Livia Drusilla walks with one hand wrapped around her servant's arm, the other holding a strip of cloth to her mouth. The fabric is already damp with breath and dust, offering little help, though it feels necessary all the same. "Stay close," she whispers. The servant nods, though in the darkness neither can truly see the other's face. All around them, voices drift through the black. Names are called out again and again, some answered, most of them not. The sound carries strangely in the heavy air, so that it is hard to tell how near or far anyone truly is. A child cries somewhere close by, and then the sound is gone, folded into the movement and the dark. Farther off, Marcus Lucretius feels his way forward, his hands held slightly ahead of him, reaching for whatever might lie in his path. His bakery is behind him now, lost to distance and ash. He no longer thinks of it. There is no room left for what was or what might be, only the next step, and then the one after that. Above them all, unseen and unrelenting, Mount Vesuvius keeps pouring ash into the sky, deepening the darkness until it feels less like the absence of light and more like the presence of something vast and quiet and final. The ground trembles again, longer this time, the shaking drawn out and steady. People go still, lowering themselves by instinct, bracing. Loose stone shifts underfoot. Somewhere nearby, a structure settles down with a low, muffled sound. This time no one cries out. There is simply no strength left to spare for it. Breathing grows harder still. The air feels thicker, warmer, more difficult to draw in, each inhale somehow incomplete, as though something essential has been quietly taken from it. Some begin to slow, not by any choice of their own, but because their bodies will no longer carry them at pace. And in the dark, falling behind is dangerous, for the city is still shifting, still coming apart, and those who cannot keep up are left behind, not through any cruelty, but simply because that is how the night is unfolding. Evening has come, and it has come far too soon. The air changes once more, not in any way the eye can catch, but in a way the body feels at once. Breathing, already hard, becomes painful. Each breath rasps at the throat and settles heavy in the chest. Coughing spreads through the crowd, dry at first, then rougher, until it becomes a constant undercurrent beneath everything else. The air is no longer only full of ash, it is beginning to turn against them. People slow, not from want of will, but because their bodies begin to resist the effort of moving at all. Legs grow heavy, steps shorten. Even standing takes concentration now. Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, once so confident and full of voice, leans against a wall he can barely make out, his breaths coming shallow and quick, each one chased by a cough he cannot hold back. He tries to straighten, to move on with the others, but the strength that once defined him is quietly slipping away. Around him, others sink down. Some lower themselves to their knees, some come to rest against the soft ground and stay there. A few rise again, manage a step or two, then stop once more. There is no clear line between those who go on and those who cannot, only a gentle, gradual parting. In the streets the voices weaken. Calls for loved ones grow softer and less frequent, giving way to the sound of laboured breathing. Even the panic begins to ebb, not because the danger has eased, but because there is no longer breath enough to sustain it. Fear needs air, and air is growing scarce. Above it all, hidden yet inescapable, Mount Vesuvius continues its quiet work, the eruption feeding the sky and the sky feeding the ground, filling every open space with heat and ash and vapour. The warmth rises, not sharply, not enough to harm just yet, but enough to make the air feel wrong, closer and heavier than it should be, as though the very space around them were drawing inward. Publius Cornelius presses forward, his hold on his son beginning to loosen. He tightens it again by instinct, unwilling to let go. His wife stumbles behind him, her breathing uneven, her footing unsure. "We have to keep moving," he says, though his voice has fallen to little more than a whisper. They try. Yet the distance they hope to place between themselves and the city seems never to grow. Every step forward meets the same close air, the same darkness, the same uncertainty. There is no clear way out, only the fading hope of one. And as the air grows heavier and warmer, a quiet understanding begins to settle over them, arriving slowly, gently, the way everything has arrived on this day. This is no longer something to be outrun. It is something closing in from every side, something that needs no speed of its own, because it takes the very thing that escape would require. What comes next gives no warning. There is no moment to prepare, no time to understand, only a change, faint at first, almost too subtle to notice. The air grows hotter, not by slow degrees, but in a sudden, unnatural shift, the kind that makes the skin prickle and the body pause without quite knowing why. A few sense it. Most do not, for by now so much of the world has already gone strange that one more change scarcely registers. Then the ground trembles again, stronger and longer than before. It does not ease quickly this time. It lingers, a deep and steady vibration running through the stone, through the streets, through everyone still standing. Loose debris shifts. Ash slides in soft cascades from rooftops already worn past holding. And somewhere out beyond the dark, beyond sight and understanding, something far larger gives way. Above it all, hidden but certain, Mount Vesuvius releases the force it has been holding back. A surge takes shape, a swift-moving wave of heated gas and ash and debris, dense and unstoppable, far beyond anything the people below could picture. It does not move like wind. It does not behave like fire. It advances like a wall. In the streets there is no clear sign of its coming, only a growing pressure in the air, a sudden deepening of the heat, a sense that something immense is approaching at a speed that cannot be answered. Marcus Lucretius stumbles onward, barely able to see, barely able to breathe. He pauses a moment and turns his head as though listening for something. There is nothing to hear, no roar, no warning, because it is already very near. Elsewhere, Livia Drusilla holds tightly to her servant's arm, her strength nearly spent, her breath shallow. The torch they carry flickers once, twice, and then goes dark. The blackness folds in again, complete. For the smallest fraction of a moment, the city holds still, not in calm, but in a kind of held breath. And then it arrives. The surge passes through Pompeii swiftly, moving along the streets and into the houses, reaching everything in its path. There is no time to react, no time to run, no time even to think. It is not something that can be outpaced. In that single moment, all movement ceases and all sound falls away. The city, so lately alive with voices and footsteps and breath, sinks into a stillness deeper than any it has ever known, not because the danger has passed, but because the day has drawn to its quiet close. What follows is not peace, though it wears the shape of it. The movement is gone. The voices are gone. The frantic, hurried energy that once filled the streets has been smoothed away so completely that it might never have been there at all. Pompeii does not drift into silence. It is laid gently into it. The ash keeps settling, drifting down slowly now, no longer urgent, no longer harsh. It comes to rest on rooftops and on quiet streets, softening every hard edge it touches. Everything is covered. Everything is still. Where there were once footsteps, there are only the faint shapes they left behind. Where there were once voices, there is only the memory of them. The city stays where it always was, its walls and doorways and courtyards standing on, though stripped of the one thing that ever gave them meaning. Inside what was once a home, a figure rests where it came to be, one hand lifted a little, as if it had reached toward someone just beyond its grasp. Another lies nearby, curled gently inward, holding to the last quiet instinct to shelter, to endure, to keep those it loved close. Across the town the same tender scenes repeat, moments left unfinished, gestures held mid-motion, ordinary lives paused and kept exactly as they were, so that all the long centuries afterward would remember them. There is no order to where each person came to rest, no reason that explains who was reached first or who was spared a little longer. There are only endings, quiet and scattered across the town. Overhead, the sky can no longer be seen. In its place hangs the long, settled presence of ash, thick and motionless, drawing itself over the city like a decision that cannot be taken back. And higher still, quiet once more, stands Mount Vesuvius, calm again, as though nothing at all had passed. As though the sorrow below had been only a brief moment, already slipping out of memory. Time, though, does not forget. It slows, and then it holds still. The layers of ash grow firm. The city is kept. Not by anyone's intention, not out of kindness, but wholly and without exception. Every lane, every room, every last resting place stays fixed where it was, spared from change, spared from the wearing away of years. Pompeii does not vanish, it is covered over, withdrawn from the world and yet whole beneath it. Long centuries will pass before it is looked upon again. Before the stillness is lifted, before the last hours of these lives are gently uncovered, studied, and quietly held in thought by those who arrive far, far later. And when that happens, one truth will stay with them and refuse to fade. This was not a tragedy set safely at a distance, not a figure in a book. It was a day, a single day, lived 1 hour after another, one breath after another, by people much like ourselves, until there were no more hours left to live. Their memory is what remains, and it is worth carrying kindly. In ancient Egypt, hair was thought of less as a treasured feature and more as a lasting nuisance. It grew when no one wished it to, It held onto heat like a badly built roof, and it had a habit of drawing in small, unwelcome things that no one, in any age, has ever been glad to keep. So the Egyptians, being sensible people whenever it served them, made a bold choice. They did away with it entirely. A shaved head was not a mark of shame or of defiance. It was simply ordinary. Men shaved, women shaved. Children were often shaved too, with now and then a single symbolic lock left in place, a small gesture toward tradition. In a land where the sun gave no mercy and cleanliness was a daily effort, being without hair was purely practical. It kept the head cooler, it kept away small pests. It removed a good deal of the fuss involved in tending something that plainly had no regard for the climate around it. And yet, for all this quiet war against natural hair, the Egyptians were strangely devoted to hairstyles. This is where plain logic steps politely aside. For while real hair was removed, artificial hair became something close to art. Wigs were never an afterthought. They were a declaration. Made from human hair, from plant fibers, or from a blend of the two, they were styled, layered, braided, and shaped with such care that one might suspect the Egyptians did not dislike hair at all. They simply wished to command it. A wig did not grow in unexpected directions. It did not rebel. It did precisely what it was made to do, and no more. It could be lifted off when it was in the way, adjusted when needed, and replaced altogether when fashion asked for it. In short, it was everything that natural hair refused to be. Rank soon found its place within this arrangement. The grander the wig, the more it announced about the one who wore it. Thick curls, tight braids, layers set just so, none of these were idle choices. They were signals. Wealth, standing, identity, all displayed without a word being spoken. Even the gods, as they appear in Egyptian art, seldom showed anything resembling ordinary hair. They too wore perfection. And so the Egyptians did not reject hair, they rejected its unruliness. In doing so, they turned an everyday thing into something wholly deliberate, controlled, and unmistakably commanding. For in ancient Egypt, even your hair, or the absence of it, was part of the performance. Once the Egyptians had removed their natural hair, they did something quietly amusing. They put in its place hair that was better, not a little better, not merely improved, but superior in every possible way, thicker, darker, more even, and above all, obedient. Because if there is one thing natural hair will not consent to be, it is obedient. Wigs settled that difficulty at once. These were not plain coverings thrown on out of need. Egyptian wigs were engineered, built with purpose, formed with precision, and styled to say a great deal more than mere appearance. They were, in a sense, an identity one could wear. The materials alone tell the whole story. The wealthy used real human hair, gathered with care and woven into dense, layered structures that could stand beside anything in modern fashion. Those with less relied on plant fibers or wool, arriving at similar shapes with a touch less elegance, yet making the very same point. Everyone, in one form or another, took part. Design counted for a great deal. Short wigs close to the scalp offered practicality and a certain quiet assurance. Longer wigs, flowing over the shoulders, suggested standing, leisure, and the sort of life in which one need not fret about labouring in the fields. Then there were the elaborate creations, braided, curled, sometimes tiered in layers that looked less like hair and more like architecture. And like all architecture, they asked for upkeep. Wigs were cleaned, oiled, perfumed, and stored with care when set aside. For while natural hair might endure a little neglect, a wig had standards. Let it fall into disrepair, and the carefully built image would collapse into something far less impressive. There is also the small matter that a wig could be exchanged, which meant identity itself could be altered at will. A different wig for a different occasion. A more formal style for ceremonies, a simpler one for daily errands. In a society so deeply concerned with presentation, this flexibility was not merely convenient, it was essential. You were not fixed to a single version of yourself. You could offer the version that best suited the moment. Even children and servants wore wigs, though often plainer ones. The point was not to keep others out, but to include everyone. All existed within this system of measured appearance, simply at differing levels of refinement. So while it might seem a small deception to trade real hair for something made, the Egyptians saw it otherwise. This was not deceit. This was betterment. For why accept what merely grows when you might wear something shaped exactly as you wish? And in a world built upon order, symbol, and control, the question answers itself. Once the wig was set perfectly in place, balanced, structured, and radiating the quiet confidence of something that would never misbehave, the Egyptians added the final touch. For looking impressive was only half the task. In a climate where the heat did not politely withdraw, smelling acceptable and better yet pleasant was a daily challenge. And the Egyptians, who never cared to do things by halves, met this problem with remarkable invention. Here entered the scented cone. At first glance it seems almost absurd, a small wax-like cone placed with care atop the wig or directly on the head, resting there as though it fully means to stay exactly where it is, which, for a while at least, it does. But the sun has its own intentions. As the day wears on and the warmth builds, the cone begins to soften. Slowly, steadily, it melts, releasing oils and perfumes that seep down into the wig and hair below. The effect is gradual, almost theatrical, a patient spreading of fragrance, so that the wearer carries a steady and agreeable scent throughout the day. It is, in essence, a slow-release perfume, subtle, efficient, and only a little inconvenient. For while the idea is graceful, the practice asks a certain patience. Picture standing in the Egyptian heat, perfectly dressed and carefully composed, while something upon your head is quietly turning to liquid, a gentle reminder that beauty, as ever, comes with its conditions. And still, this was desired. Perfume in ancient Egypt was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Oils guarded the skin against dryness, softened the less pleasant sides of daily life, and carried social meaning besides. The kind of scent, the quality of the oils, even the ingredients chosen, all of it told something about the person wearing them. The wealthy could reach for the finest blends, frankincense, myrrh, lotus extracts, complex layered fragrances that lingered long after they had left a room. Others made do with simpler oils, serving the same purpose if not the same refinement. Yet the aim held steady. Control. Control over how one appeared. Control over how one was perceived. Even control over how one smelled, hour by hour, as the sun did its steady work. For in ancient Egypt, presentation was never fixed. It changed across the day, at times quite literally melting into place. It was a language, a quiet, carefully built system in which every strand, every curl, every layer said something about who you were and where you stood. And like all good systems, it cared deeply about status. Not everyone wore the same wig. That would have been far too equal, and ancient societies rarely indulged in that kind of simplicity. Instead, hairstyles became markers, clear and visible signs of wealth, rank, and importance. At the lower end, wigs were practical, simpler in design, fewer in layers, lighter in volume, still shaped, still intended, but without the intricacy that demanded time, resources, and skilled hands. These were the wigs of workers, servants, and those with more pressing concerns than perfect symmetry upon the head. Then came the middle ground. People of some means and some standing began to add more detail. Braids appeared. Curls were defined. The structure grew more deliberate. These wigs did not shout of wealth, but they certainly hinted at it. The message was quiet, perhaps not commanding, yet far from insignificant. And then, at the top, everything shifted. The elite did not wear wigs. They wore statements, thick, layered constructions that framed the face and reached over the shoulders, often parted into sections braided with precision or arranged into measured waves. These were not quick creations. They called for craftsmanship, upkeep, and a degree of attention that came close to devotion. The result was unmistakable. Power made visible. Royal figures carried this further still. The wigs linked to rulers and high officials were not merely elaborate, they were symbolic. Shapes grew more defined, styles more rigid, sometimes joined with headdresses that lent height, presence, and authority. A ruler did not simply enter a room. They arrived, declaring their standing before a single word was spoken. Even children were not outside this system. The famous side lock, one section of hair left unshaved while the rest of the head stayed smooth, marked youth and standing in a way anyone could recognize at once. Nothing was accidental. Every choice, every detail, every carefully placed strand added to a larger message. In a society built upon hierarchy and order, appearance reinforced reality. You were what you wore. And in ancient Egypt, what you wore upon your head may have been the most telling part of all. If adults in ancient Egypt used wigs to announce status, to shape appearance, and to quietly command a room without speaking, children were given something far simpler, a single lock of hair. Known today as the side lock of youth, this style was exactly what its name suggests. A shaved head with one strand carefully kept, usually falling to the side. Least effort, greatest meaning. It told everyone what they needed to know. This is a child. Treat them accordingly. The rest of the head stayed shaved, holding on to every practical benefit the Egyptians so clearly valued: coolness, cleanliness, and the general absence of small things crawling where they ought not to be. But that one lock remained, often braided or shaped, kept on purpose rather than overlooked, for nothing in ancient Egypt was ever accidental. The side lock spoke not only of age, but of identity and passage, a visible sign that this person was not yet fully part of the adult world, though moving toward it, still protected, still dependent, still living in a space where the expectations were gentler. And like everything else, it carried meaning beyond the plain. In sacred imagery, the child god Horus is often shown with this same side lock, deepening its message: youth, tenderness, promise, all gathered into a single, slightly impractical strand of hair. When even the gods keep your hairstyle, you may assume it carries some weight. As children grew, the lock stayed until a certain age or stage of life. Then, in time, it was gone. removed like everything else that marked childhood, as the person stepped into adult roles and expectations. And that passage mattered, because once the lock was gone, the choices grew more involved. Shaving, wigs, oils, status, everything that defined adult identity now applied. There was no more simplicity, no more single strand to explain who you were. You had to build it yourself, which, in a society as devoted to detail as ancient Egypt, was both an opportunity and a responsibility. So while the side lock may seem a small thing beside the elaborate wigs of the elite, it served a vital purpose. It marked a beginning, a quiet, unmistakable sign that one day this child would step into a world where even their hair, or its absence, would become part of a far larger performance. If wigs stood for control, and if every strand a person wore could be read as a signal of status, then the priests of ancient Egypt went in the opposite direction entirely. Their choice was to wear nothing at all. For them, complete baldness was not simply a matter of comfort or convenience. It was a rule they lived by. Where others might shave to stay cool or to keep things tidy, the priests shaved for the sake of purity, and they did so not now and then but continually. Head, body, face, every surface was cleared of hair with a thoroughness that suggests very little was left to chance, and even less to regrowth. In the world they inhabited, hair was not merely a nuisance. It was considered impure. The temples were not ordinary buildings. They were understood as places where the divine dwelled close at hand, where rituals were carried out day after day, and where even the smallest thing might carry weight and meaning. To step into such a space required preparation, and that preparation began with the body. Hair, being natural, unpredictable, and inclined to gather dust, oil, and the occasional stray insect, simply did not meet the required standard. So it was taken away, and taken away often. Priests would shave themselves several times across short stretches, making certain that not a trace remained. This was never a single act completed once. It was an ongoing discipline, a routine that asked for attention, precision, and, one can only imagine, a fair degree of patience with the sheer inconvenience of it. Still, the outcome was plain to see. A body kept in perfect order, a surface free of anything wild or uncontrolled. Set beside the elaborate wigs favoured by the elite, the appearance of the priests seemed almost austere. No ornament, no artificial addition, nothing but clean lines and a deliberate simplicity. The aim was never to impress the eye. The aim was to be found acceptable in the presence of the gods. And their care did not end with shaving. It carried on through constant washing, the application of oils, and a strict attention to personal upkeep. Purity, in their view, could never be reached once, and then set aside. It had to be renewed again and again through steady effort. This produced a curious divide within Egyptian life. On one side stood those who used wigs, oils, and careful styling to shape their identity, to display their standing, and to guide how others saw them. On the other side stood the priests, who stripped all of it away, reducing themselves to something more restrained, more disciplined, and, in its own way, more extreme. Both paths were about control. They simply moved in opposite directions. One added layer upon layer. The other removed everything. And in a culture where nothing about appearance was ever left to accident, even the absence of hair held its own quiet meaning. Sometimes, after all, saying nothing says a great deal. If the living took such care with how they looked, and they clearly did, then the dead were tended to with even greater care. Or rather, the living took that care on their behalf, which was perhaps a heavier thing, since the one being prepared no longer had any say in the final version of themselves that would be kept for all time. In ancient Egypt, death did not make matters simpler. it made them more involved. Because now a person's appearance was no longer a passing thing. It was permanent, and permanence asks for a certain completeness. When someone died, the body was made ready with great attention. It was cleansed, wrapped, and preserved. Yet through all of this, appearance still mattered, and hair once again entered the process, or more precisely, the suggestion of hair. Wigs were often included with the deceased, either placed upon the head or set among the goods prepared for burial. These were not casual pieces or everyday wear, but carefully chosen ones, meant to present the person in the finest possible light. Wherever they were bound, they would need to look as they should. In Egyptian belief, the afterlife was not a vague notion. It was ordered and structured, a continuation of existence in which identity still carried weight. And identity, as we have already seen, was closely tied to how one appeared. To arrive poorly presented was simply not an option. So wigs were chosen with the same attention given during life, and perhaps with even more. They were thick, well-shaped, balanced, and idealized. Not always true to life, but complete in themselves. This was never about accuracy. It was about representation, about who a person had been, or who they were meant to be remembered as. Even Osiris, so often shown with neatly arranged hair or a headdress, reinforced the belief that appearance endured beyond death. The divine realm did not abandon order. It brought that order to its highest form. For the wealthy, this meant fine wigs and elaborate preparation. For others, simpler versions served the same end. The underlying idea never changed. The dead had to be whole. Hair, or the deliberate absence of it, was never left to chance, because in death there was no chance for revision, no adjustments, no corrections, no small improvements made over time. What a person was given, they kept forever. So while the living arranged and rearranged their wigs each day, refining and correcting as they pleased, the dead were held in a single unchanging form. It was a final presentation, carefully assembled and deliberately styled, and like so much else in ancient Egypt, entirely intentional. By now it should be clear that hair in ancient Egypt was never merely decorative. It was a strategy, a carefully handled instrument used to shape how others saw you, to reinforce who you were, and, when it suited the moment, to gently steer the people around you. In a society built upon order and symbol, appearance was never neutral. It always carried a message. For women, and especially those among the elite, hairstyles and wigs became a way of establishing presence. Long, flowing wigs with layered curls framed the face, softened its lines, and created an impression of measured elegance. Braids brought structure and precision, a kind of visual rhythm that spoke of both care and intent. Nothing happened by accident. Even the way a wig moved, how it settled on the shoulders, how it shifted with each step, was part of the effect. It made an impression, and impressions, in a world where power so often rested on perception, mattered more than almost anything. For men, the message was different, though no less considered. A wig could suggest authority, steadiness, control. A well-made style implied discipline and order. The manner of a person who understood their place and expected others to understand it as well. And then there were the rulers. Figures such as Cleopatra, whose image has been shaped as much by legend as by record, are often linked to particular, unmistakable hairstyles. Whether that link is wholly accurate or not, the very existence of it tells us something worth noting. Hair became part of the legend, a visual shorthand for identity, power, and presence. When people remember someone, they rarely remember everything. They remember what stood out. And, in ancient Egypt, hair, whether real or crafted, was designed to do exactly that. Beyond status and beyond beauty, there was also the matter of control. A wig could be adjusted, replaced, and perfected. Unlike natural hair, which grew unevenly and refused to cooperate, a wig offered consistency, the ability to present the same image day after day with no variation. In a culture that prized order over disorder, this was not merely convenient, it was close to ideal. So hair became more than a personal style. It became a language, a way of speaking without words, of asserting without explanation, of influencing without seeming to try at all. And like every powerful tool, it was handled with care, because in ancient Egypt even the smallest detail could shape how a person was seen, and how a person was seen could shape a great deal else. At the close of the day, once the heat had softened the scented cones, once the oils had quietly done their work, once the carefully arranged curls had held their shape through sun and motion, there came a moment that is rarely shown. The wig came off, and with it something else slipped away as well. For all that wigs served as instruments of control, identity, and carefully managed perfection, they were also, in their way, a kind of performance, a constructed version of the self worn outward for others to see, to interpret, and to respond to. Removing it was not dramatic. There was no audience, only a quieter version of the person who had worn it. Beneath the wig, plain reality returned. A shaved scalp, smooth and practical, free of ornament. No curls, no braids, no layered statements of rank, only skin, unadorned and clear. In that moment the contrast came into view. The public self, shaped and displayed. The private self, simplified and functional. This doubling was not accidental. It reflected something deeper in Egyptian life, the constant balance between order and reality, between what was shown and what was lived. In the temples, in the art, in the daily routines, everything was structured, deliberate, and composed. Yet beneath that structure, there was always something plainer and more human. The wig, then, was not deception. It was translation. It was a way of taking the unpredictable, the imperfect, the natural, and reshaping it into something ordered, meaningful, and visible to others. It was a way of turning identity into something that could be seen, understood, and remembered. And yet it was temporary. Each day it was put on. Each day it was taken off. That cycle mirrored much of Egyptian life itself, rituals repeated, appearances maintained, order rebuilt again and again against the quiet persistence of change. For despite all their efforts to control, to define, and to perfect, the Egyptians understood something fundamental. Nothing stays fixed forever, not the body, not the image, not even the carefully assembled versions of ourselves that we hold up to the world. But for a time, beneath the sun and the weight of a finely made wig, surrounded by scent and structure, they could come remarkably close. And now and then, that was enough. In the Celtic world, a wedding was not a soft promise, murmured between two people beneath a gentle sky. It was a negotiation, and not the romantic sort. It was the kind in which two families sat, watched, weighed, and quietly worked out what the union would mean long after the ceremony had ended. Though the couple stood at the centre, they were never truly alone. Behind them stood whole clans, carrying their histories, their grudges, their alliances, and their expectations, all reaching far beyond simple affection. Marriage here was not only about love, it was about stability. Land might change hands. livestock might be exchanged. Agreements might be reached that touched not 2 lives, but dozens, sometimes hundreds. A wedding could strengthen alliances, settle disputes, or, if handled badly, give rise to entirely new ones. So, understandably, everyone paid close attention. The process often began well before the ceremony itself. Families discussed terms, sometimes in a formal manner, and sometimes through a series of casual conversations that were anything but casual. What would be given? What would be received? What protections would stand if the marriage were to fail? The Celts, practical as always, did not assume that everything would go smoothly. They prepared for the reverse. Dowries or bride prices were arranged. Gifts were exchanged, not token trinkets but meaningful assets, things that carried value, commitment and, above all, consequence. This was not a mere gesture. It was a contract, simply without the paperwork that modern society is so fond of. And yet, for all this structure, something more human remained. The couple were not beside the point. Their compatibility mattered, though not in the gentle romantic sense of shared dreams and long walks through open fields. It mattered in a practical way. Could they live together? Could they keep a household running? Could they raise heirs, manage their responsibilities, and represent their families without creating needless trouble? Because that was the true expectation, not perfection, but function. So when the day of the wedding finally came, what unfolded was more than a celebration. It was the visible confirmation of an agreement, a moment in which 2 individuals stepped forward, yes, but in which, more importantly, 2 clans bound themselves together with all the weight, opportunity, and quiet tension such a bond inevitably carried. And once that bond was made, there was no pretending it had ever been simple. Once the agreement was settled, the terms discussed and the expectations quietly locked into place, the next phase began. People arrived, and not merely a handful of close relatives wearing polite smiles. Entire groups began to gather, moving across hills, through forests, and along rough paths, bringing with them not only gifts and provisions, but their very presence. At a Celtic wedding, showing up was not optional. It was a statement in itself. Who attended mattered. Who stayed away mattered even more. Families arrived in clusters, often in their finest garments, not so much out of vanity as for the sake of representation. You did not appear only as yourself, you appeared as part of something larger. A clan's strength, wealth, and unity were quietly displayed through numbers, through conduct, and through the subtle art of looking as though you belonged exactly where you stood. The location itself was seldom chosen at random. Ceremonies often took place outdoors, near natural landmarks, groves, rivers, open fields, or ancient stones that had stood long enough to make any human agreement feel fleeting by comparison. These places were not selected for their beauty alone. They carried meaning. In Celtic belief, nature was not a backdrop. It was a participant. The land bore witness to the union, the sky looked on, and the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, were present, whether openly acknowledged or not. It lent a seriousness that no enclosed hall could quite match. As the crowd gathered, the mood became something layered. There was excitement, certainly. Weddings were among the few occasions when large groups came together without the immediate expectation of conflict. Yet beneath that excitement there was observation. People watched one another. Old rivalries were set aside for the day, or at least politely overlooked. New alliances were noted. Conversations took place in quiet corners, words exchanged that had little to do with the couple and everything to do with the shifting landscape of relationships. And all the while, in the background, The preparations continued. The food has been laid out. The fires have been built up. A place has been opened for the ceremony itself. Everything proceeds with a quiet sense of purpose, even though no one seems to be issuing commands. It is custom, more than any single person, that guides each step. And in the middle of all this activity, the couple waits. They are not set apart entirely, yet they are not quite woven into the crowd either. They occupy a place between two worlds, the separate lives they have each lived until now, and the shared life that is about to be spoken aloud in front of everyone who has come. For once the ceremony begins, this gathering will change from a group that merely watches into a body that bears witness. As the crowd settles, voices dropping low, movement slowing to stillness, attention drifts toward the center. There is no towering building here, no decorated hall, but something far older in its meaning. A space is marked out, sometimes with a ring of stones, sometimes with simple lines drawn by those who carry the knowledge of the rite. It does not need to be grand, it only needs to be understood. This is the threshold where the ordinary falls away, and something more deliberate takes its place. At the heart of this marked ground, a fire is made ready, not chiefly for warmth, though warmth it gives, not for cooking, though later it might serve that too. This fire is kindled for another reason altogether. It stands as a witness, a symbol, a steady presence that turns the ceremony from a mere agreement into something that binds. For in Celtic belief, the fire is not idle or passive. It sees, it carries meaning across the boundary between the seen world and the unseen. To stand beside it is to lay your words, your promises, and your intentions out in the open, before something that is not easily fooled or ignored. The flames rise gently at first, then grow firmer, steadier, held under control. It is not a roaring blaze, but a contained one, purposeful, large enough to be felt, bright enough to be seen. Its light moves across the faces of those who have gathered, casting flickers where there had been stillness, reminding everyone present that this moment is not fixed or frozen. It is alive. The couple is led forward. They take their place beside the fire, near enough to feel its heat, far enough to stay composed. This is no longer about them as two separate people. It is about what they stand for. Two family lines, two histories, now set side by side in a place where their separateness no longer defines them. Around them the crowd forms a quiet border. They are no longer onlookers in any casual sense, but witnesses. Each person there now holds a part to play, whether it is spoken aloud or not. They see, they remember, and simply by being present they give weight to what is about to unfold. The fire keeps burning, untouched by human feeling, indifferent to any hesitation. It does not pause. It does not wait. It merely exists, steady and sure, as if to remind them all that whatever is spoken here will be measured against something far more lasting than any single person's wish. And within that presence, the ceremony begins to take its shape. Words will soon be said, promises soon made. But first the couple must stand still, shoulder to shoulder, in the glow of something that has no interest in bargaining. For once the fire has witnessed it, there can be no pretending it never happened. With the fire steady and the gathering now hushed in the way that only a fully attentive crowd can be, the ceremony moves to its most familiar moment, the binding. This is where the old phrase, tying the knot, stops being a figure of speech and becomes something literal. The couple steps nearer to one another, their hands brought forward, most often the right hands, though the details shift a little from one region and interpretation to the next. And then a cord is brought out. Not just any cord. It might be a braided rope, a length of woven cloth, or a strip of fabric prepared for this very moment. Sometimes plain, sometimes decorated, but always chosen with intent. For this is not ornament, this is the act itself. The officiant, often a druid or an elder, someone trusted to understand both the ritual and its meaning, winds the cord around the couple's joined hands slowly and deliberately, each loop set in place with care, as though hurrying would somehow weaken what is being made. The hands are bound together, not so tightly as to cause discomfort, but firmly enough to be felt, a physical reminder that what is happening here is not a mere idea. It is not only spoken, it is enacted. And as the cord settles into place, something changes. The two people who stood beside one another only moments before are now joined, not in some vague symbolic way, but visibly, plainly. Anyone watching can see it. Anyone present can hold it in memory. This is the point at which the ceremony becomes real. Words may follow, vows may be spoken, but this moment, the binding, is what defines the union. It stands for more than connection. It stands for obligation, a joining that carries weight beyond feeling. For in Celtic tradition, hand fasting was not always permanent in the way we think of it now. Some unions were formed for a set span of time, a year and a day, after which the couple could choose to carry on together or to part. A practical arrangement, one might say, a way of testing whether two lives truly fit before committing to them for good. But whether the union was temporary or meant for a lifetime, its meaning held firm. You are bound. What one of you does now touches the other. Your choices are no longer entirely your own. And as the cord holds their hands together, the couple stands before their clans, before the fire, and before the land itself, quietly acknowledging that what has been tied here is not easily undone. For once bound, even for a little while, nothing returns quite to what it was before. With their hands bound and the fire steady at their side, the ceremony reaches its most delicate moment, the speaking. Silence, up to this point, has been safe. Actions can be watched, read, even slightly misread if need be. But words, once released, tend to stay exactly where they were set down, refusing to be quietly adjusted later when life proves less agreeable than hoped. The couple now turns to face one another, still joined, close enough to feel the gentle pull of the cord, aware of every eye upon them and every ear leaning in. This is no private exchange. There is no room here for vague promises or for pretty phrases that sound fine in the moment and dissolve soon after. What is said here carries weight. Vows in a Celtic wedding are not fixed lines recited without thought. They vary. Sometimes they are simple, sometimes deeply personal, but they are always rooted in the same idea, commitment put into words that everyone present can understand. Promises are made to support, to protect, to remain loyal, not in the abstract but in practical ways, to share the burdens, to keep the household, to stand together through the times that will almost certainly test whatever confidence they feel now. For unlike more modern ceremonies, which sometimes lean toward untroubled optimism, Celtic tradition carries a quieter realism. Life will not always be easy, and so the vows reflect that. There is often an open acknowledgement of uncertainty, of seasons turning, of fortunes that rise and fall. The promises are not about perfection. They are about endurance, about staying bound not only when it is convenient, but when it is hard. And, as each word is spoken, it is witnessed not by the officiant alone, but by the whole gathering, family, allies, even those who came out of duty rather than warmth. They all hear it. And once heard, those words become part of something larger, a shared memory, a record that exists without ever being written down. For in a society where agreements are upheld through reputation rather than paperwork, what is spoken openly carries real force. Forgetting a vow is one thing, being reminded of it by an entire community is another matter entirely. The fire keeps burning beside them, indifferent yet present. The cord stays tied, and with each promise spoken the binding deepens, not in the body, but in a way far harder to loosen. For once words are set loose into the air, especially in a moment like this, they do not simply vanish. They remain, and they expect to be honoured. With the vows spoken carefully, publicly, and now lodged for good in the memory of everyone present, the ceremony turns from words to something rather less poetic, property. For while promises carry meaning, from a Celtic point of view, they are also incomplete without something to reinforce them. A union may be blessed by fire and witnessed by clans, yet it is secured through exchange. Gifts are brought forward, and not casual ones, not small tokens meant to be admired for a moment and then forgotten. These are deliberate, practical contributions, things that hold value, purpose, and consequence. Livestock, rights to land, crafted goods, weapons, textiles. Each item stands for more than generosity. It stands for commitment. Often one family offers a bride price while the other provides a dowry. The exact terms shift depending on region, standing, and whatever was agreed beforehand, but the underlying logic stays the same. Both sides invest, both sides take on risk, and both sides gain something tangible from the union. This is not cold or merely transactional. It is stabilizing, because a marriage without shared investment is fragile, while a marriage reinforced with resources, things that can be counted, used, and if necessary reclaimed, becomes far more durable. If the union fails, there are real consequences. If it thrives, there is growth. Everything is accounted for, and, just as importantly, everything is witnessed. Nothing changes hands in secret. The exchange takes place before the gathered clans, so that there can be no confusion afterward about who gave what, who received what, and under which conditions. It is all observed, remembered, and, if it comes to it, enforced through social pressure rather than a written contract, which in historical terms could prove far more effective. The couple stands at the centre of this, still bound, still positioned between two groups who are now quite literally investing in their future. What they receive is not merely wealth, it is expectation, to manage it, to grow it, to justify it. For once resources are tied to a union, that union carries weight beyond feeling. It becomes something others depend upon, something that reflects not just private happiness, but the strength of the agreement itself. And as the final items change hands, the message grows clear. This marriage is no longer only spoken. It is anchored, bound not only by vows and ritual, but by the very real, very tangible fact of shared value. And a bond of that kind is not easily set aside. With the gifts exchanged and the union now grounded in more than sentiment, the ceremony turns towards something older, quieter, and far less open to negotiation, the blessing. For in the Celtic view, a marriage witnessed only by people remains incomplete. People forget. They quarrel. They retell events in ways that are convenient rather than accurate. If you wish something to last, you call upon forces that are less easily swayed. So the couple, still bound, still standing beside the fire, becomes the focus once more, not as negotiators, not as recipients, but as participants in something beyond their own control. The officiant steps forward, often a druid or an elder, deeply versed in tradition, and speaks not to the crowd but outward, to the land, the sky, the unseen presence believed to lie just past what can be touched. The words are not idle. They are structured, deliberate, carrying the weight of repetition handed down across generations. They call upon the elements, earth for steadiness, air for breath and change, fire, already present, for transformation and for witness, and water for flow and continuity. Each is named, acknowledged, invited, not as decoration but as a genuine participant in the union. For in Celtic belief these forces are not passive. They shape life, they sway outcomes, and when ignored they tend to make their displeasure felt in ways that are hard to overlook. The couple may be guided to touch the ground, to face the fire, to turn toward the wind, or to acknowledge water nearby. Each gesture reinforces the same truth: this marriage does not stand alone. It exists within a larger order, and that order is now aware of it. Around them the gathered clans stay silent, but their role has shifted again. No longer onlookers or negotiators, they have become witnesses in a deeper sense. They are not only remembering what happened, they are affirming that it has been seen, heard and accepted, not by people alone but by the world itself. And in a culture where land and lineage are so closely bound together, that matters greatly. For a blessing is not simply approval. It is expectation, a quiet understanding that what has been joined here ought to endure, ought to hold, ought to fall into step with the order of things rather than disturb it. The fire burns on, as steady as ever. The cord still binds. And as the last words of the blessing settle into the air, the ceremony arrives at a point where nothing further needs to be proven. The union has been seen by the clans, by the land, and by something greater than both. And in this world, that is as binding as anything can be. With the blessing spoken and the unseen forces graciously acknowledged, the ceremony reaches the moment everyone has quietly been waiting for, the feast. For while vows bind and rituals sanctify, nothing quite reveals the true strength of a union like a hall, or more accurately, an open field, full of well-fed and gently merry relatives who suddenly recall every opinion they have ever held. The food arrives in great quantity. Meat and bread, ale and whatever else the region can offer, all set out in amounts that make clear restraint was never the intention. This is not a modest gathering where a meal is shared with polite economy. It is a demonstration of generosity, of means, of the simple capacity to provide. Feeding a crowd is more than an act of kindness here. It is evidence. It shows that the union has backing, that resources are real, that the couple and, even more so, their families can uphold what has just been formed. A thin, sparing feast would invite whispered doubts. A lavish one settles those doubts before anyone can voice them. And once the eating truly begins, so does the honest business of the evening. People speak, though not in the careful, weighed tones of the earlier hours. Conversation loosens into something warmer and less guarded. Stories circulate, some about the newly joined pair, others about matters entirely unrelated that, after enough ale, somehow feel connected to the moment. Laughter swells, caution falls away, and the invisible lines between the clans begin either to soften or, now and then, to sharpen. For a gathering like this does not only reinforce alliances, it quietly tests them. Old strains can surface again, dressed up as teasing or offhand comment. Long-standing rivalries may flicker back into view, then be smoothed over or left to smoulder, depending on how the night turns. The measure of a feast lies not only in the quality of its food, but in the absence of open conflict, or at least in how gracefully any conflict is kept in check. Through all of this, the couple move with care. They no longer occupy the ceremonial center, yet they remain closely watched. The way they speak to one another, the way they hold themselves, the way they answer both flattery and the gentle pressure of expectation, all of it is noticed. This is their first trial, not of affection but of function. Can they take a place within this web of kinship without unsettling it? Can they hold their footing? As the fire sinks lower and the voices climb higher, an answer slowly forms, not spoken aloud, but read in conduct, and by the night's end each guest will have arrived at some private judgment. Whether they choose to share it is a separate question. The feast begins to thin, voices dropping, flames settling into embers, the last cups of ale passing with less eagerness than before. The ceremony comes to its quiet close, not with a proclamation but with a leaving, for at some point the couple must go. Until now they have stood between two worlds, between the families that raised them and the future they will share, between the selves they once were and something newly made. That in-between cannot hold forever. The ritual, the vows, the exchanges, all of it has pointed toward this last step, a parting from everything that came before. The couple ready themselves to depart, not in loneliness, but in full awareness. Every motion is still followed, though less intently now. The crowd, weary but attentive, watches the crossing. This is no longer a performance. It is a life beginning to be lived. Depending on the custom of the place, the two may leave together toward a new home, or one may be formally received into the household of the other's clan. The meaning holds either way. They do not go back the way they came, because what has been made cannot be unmade simply by walking off. The cord that once joined their hands is unwound, yet its going does not erase what it did. If anything, it sharpens it. They are no longer bound in the flesh, but the expectation stays, the memory stays, the agreement stays, and so too does its weight. Behind them the clans begin to drift apart. Conversations wind down. Alliances ease into their new arrangement, and ordinary life resumes its familiar pace, quietly altered, subtly shifted. What had been two separate paths is now a single one, and that change reaches outward, touching, in a small way, everyone tied to it. The fire, reduced to glowing ash, still marks the ground where all of this happened, a token that something was witnessed here, not only by the gathered people, but by the land itself. Ahead of the couple waits something far less ordered. Not ceremony, not ritual, but life, unpredictable and demanding, and far less forgiving than the carefully managed evening they leave behind. The vows will be put to the test. The alliance will be weighed. The expectations, the spoken and the unspoken alike, will have to be met. A Celtic wedding does not conclude with celebration. It opens with it, and everything that follows is where the true binding is made. Death in the Viking world does not come softly. It does not slip past unseen or grant a graceful pause. It makes itself known plainly, at awkward moments, with a stubbornness that will not be brushed aside. 1 hour a man is alive, speaking of raids and hard-won victories. The next he is gone, and those who remain are left holding a long list of duties. For the Norse, death is not an ending. That would be too simple, and, frankly, too dull. It is instead the start of a journey, one that calls for preparation, for attention to small details, and for a surprising amount of arrangement on behalf of someone who can no longer take part. The moment death arrives, the household changes its shape. Grief is present, of course, yet it is not permitted to take charge. There is work to be done, and putting it off would only make things harder. The body must be tended without delay, not from coldness, but from need. Time, unlike the one who has died, keeps moving. Family and close companions gather near. There is no dramatic hush, no poised stillness. Instead, there is motion, purposeful and nearly routine. Death is a sorrow, but it is not a stranger. Most have met it before. Some have met it more often than they would have wished. The first task is a cleansing. The body is washed with care, made clean and readied. This is not vanity, it is respect. The one who has died is being prepared for a final appearance, not only before the living, but before whatever waits beyond, and to arrive unready is simply not fitting. Then comes the clothing, not everyday garments, but chosen ones. A Viking is dressed as they would wish to be remembered, or perhaps as they would wish to be seen in the world to come. Fine cloth, armour, or plain but meaningful dress, according to standing. Each choice carries a message. This is who they were, and this is who they remain. Weapons are often laid alongside them, a sword, an axe, a shield, not because anyone imagines the dead will rise to defend themselves, but because who a person is does not end with the last breath. A warrior without arms is no warrior at all, even now. As this quiet transformation takes place, the living begin to assemble, for this is not only a farewell, it is the opening scene of something far larger. Once the body has been washed, dressed, and made presentable, the attention turns from appearance to preparation, not the preparation of feelings. Vikings are not much given to sitting in a circle to talk over their sorrows. This is the practical kind, the kind that treats the afterlife less as a riddle and more as a destination with clear requirements for entry. The one who has died is arranged with care. A body might be laid out in a hall, set upon a raised platform, or kept for a time while the more elaborate parts of the funeral are organized, and there will be elaborate parts. Vikings rarely did anything by halves, least of all where death was concerned. Now begins the gathering of grave goods, the point where the line between the practical and the believed grows pleasantly blurred. Objects are chosen, not at random, but with intent. Weapons, tools, jewelry, drinking horns, the things that define the person in life, gathered to travel with them into death. It is less about sentiment than about continuity. The reasoning is straightforward. Wherever they are bound, they will want their belongings. So a warrior is given weapons, a craftsman his tools, and a person of wealth. A great deal of everything, since standing, it seems, does not lapse with death. If anything, it grows more important. No one wishes to arrive in the next world looking as though they packed in a rush. Food and drink are commonly included as well, for nothing wishes a safe journey quite like sending someone off with supplies for a long road. Meat, bread, ale, provisions for a way that no one has actually charted yet, everyone insists is there. Then there are the animals. Horses are the most common, prized for their swiftness and strength, since a warrior may have need of one. Dogs are sometimes present too, companions in life and, it is believed, in what follows. These animals are given over to accompany the one who has died and laid to rest beside them, a custom that sits more heavily the longer one considers it. All of this serves a single aim, to see that the dead do not arrive unready, unwelcome, or, worst of all, forgotten. In the Viking mind, the afterlife is no vague reward. It is a continuation, and no one turns up to a continuation empty-handed. By the time the body is prepared, and the grave goods have grown into what looks rather like a well-packed travelling kit, the living have begun to arrive in number. Word of a death moves quickly through a Viking community, partly out of respect and partly because no one wishes to be the one who missed the funeral everyone else attended. People come from nearby farms, from neighbouring settlements, and now and then from far away. Depending on who has died, a renowned warrior or a chieftain can draw a crowd that feels less like a morning meeting and more like a gathering for the whole region. In many ways, that is exactly what it is, for a Viking funeral is not only about honouring the dead. It is about reminding the living who mattered. As the people assemble, the mood becomes a curious blend of grief, curiosity, and social awareness. There are true tears, of course, from family, from close companions, from those who shared real bonds with the one who is gone. Beside them stand others who watch and weigh, quietly noting who has come and who has not, and what all of it says about loyalty and reputation. This is not hard-heartedness. It is the way of a world where survival rests on relationships so that even death becomes part of the social fabric. Conversations start. Stories are told, some with plain respect, others gently stretched. A small skirmish becomes a great battle. A capable hunter becomes a legend. The dead, unable to correct the account, begin their quiet passage into something larger than they were. Memory, after all, is pliable, and funerals are fine places to reshape it. Meanwhile, the preparations go on. Wood is gathered. A shit may be made ready if the one who has died was important enough, or if the family is determined to make them so in death. Whatever the truth of their life, the scale of what is coming grows plainer by the hour. This will not be a quiet burial. This will be something people remember. As the crowd swells, so does the sense of anticipation, and among those present runs an unspoken understanding. This ceremony will reflect not only the life that has ended, but the strength, the wealth, and the pride of those who remain. In Viking society, even in death, reputation is everything, and this gathering is where that reputation is about to be shown in full. Now comes the choice that divides an ordinary farewell from a tale repeated for generations. How, exactly, the dead will depart. Burial is one option, quiet, practical, and rather unremarkable. But for those of standing, or ambition, or with relatives who have a taste for spectacle, there is a grander path. Fire. Or, more precisely, a ship and then fire. Ideally both, because if you mean to send someone into the next world, you may as well make certain the gods take notice. The ship, when one is used, is not merely a vessel. It is a statement, a declaration that the person honoured was worthy not just of a grave but of a voyage. It is drawn onto the land or set near the water as local custom and convenience allow, and either way it becomes the heart of everything that follows. The body is placed aboard with careful ceremony, not thrown in, not hurried, but positioned and arranged with something close to reverence. Around it go the grave goods gathered before, tools, weapons, food, animals, personal treasures. By now the scene resembles less a funeral than a carefully arranged portrait of a whole life, gently summarized in objects. If no shit can be had, or if the practical wins out over the grand, a funeral pyre is built instead. Wood is stacked high, often higher than strictly needed, for subtlety was never a Viking strength. The aim is not merely to consign the body, but to transform it, to send it upward as smoke, to carry it away in light, to make the departure something all can see. And visibility is the point, for this is no private moment. The gathered crowd looks on as everything is set in place. They take in the scale of it all, the detail, the sheer amount of effort. Every length of timber, every object set beside the one who has died, points toward a single quiet idea. This person mattered, and those who remain are willing to show it. A kind of tension gathers now, soft but impossible to miss. The ceremony is drawing toward its height. All the preparation, all the gathering, all the patient arranging has been leading here toward one moment. Soon the fire will be lit, and once it is, nothing can be called back. Just before that flame is brought forward, before careful order gives way to something that cannot be reversed, there is a pause. Not a long one, and not heavy with sentiment, but enough to let the final rites take their course. Even the Norse, who are rarely remembered for their patience, understand that certain moments ask for ceremony and will not be hurried. At the center of it stands the ritual specialist. Often this is a woman, sometimes spoken of as a seeress or priestess. She steps forward, and her presence alone settles the crowd into stillness. This is not her first funeral. If anything, she moves with the calm assurance of someone who has done this many times before, someone who knows exactly how each part of the rite unfolds, and who, more quietly, believes in it completely. She begins her work. Chants, invocations, words spoken not to the living, but to what cannot be seen. The gods are called by name. To those who watch, this is not mere symbol. It is something closer to a task that must be carried out properly, like the opening of a door that does not take kindly to being ignored. Meanwhile, the one who has died remains at the heart of it all, encircled by the belongings of a lifetime. And in some accounts, that gathering of things grows more solemn still. The records left by outside observers, above all, the watchful traveller Ahmad ibn Fadlan, described funerals that were graver and heavier than one might imagine. Ibn Fadlan was an envoy from Baghdad who, in the early 10th century, journeyed far to the north and set down what he saw among the people of the great rivers, and his account has echoed down the centuries ever since. In certain funerals of the highest status, he tells us, a servant or a slave was chosen, or was said to have offered, to accompany the deceased onward, so that a person of great standing would not make the journey alone. It was, by the belief of the time, a solemn and public act, understood by all who were present as part of a much larger view of the world. Such things are remembered here quietly, plainly, and with the distance that time and compassion allow. Among the living, cups are lifted. Not quite in celebration, yet not wholly in sorrow either. Toasts are offered to the dead, words of memory, of respect, of a legacy being shaped even as it is spoken. Old stories return, each one growing a little more heroic with every retelling. Everything leans toward a single point. The fire is not yet lit, and still the world feels altered. The boundary between the living and the dead has thinned, stretched by ritual and belief and expectation. Standing at the edge of that boundary, everyone understands what comes next. The moment that turns a farewell into something final. At last, the waiting ends. After the chants, the offerings, the careful placing of everything that once gave shape to a life, there comes a point when nothing more can be arranged or improved. The rite has reached its edge, and all that remains is the act that gives it meaning. The fire must be lit. There is no fixed rule for who performs this, but it is never left to chance. A close relative, a respected figure, or someone chosen for what they represent, steps forward. This is no idle gesture. It is deliberate, and every gathered eye follows it. Whoever carries the flame becomes, for a brief moment, the one who joins two worlds. The torch is brought near. For the length of a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the wood catches. At first it is modest, a flicker, a small tongue of flame testing the edges of the stacked timber. But patience was never fire's failing. It spreads, climbing through the dry wood, reaching the ship or the pyre, folding itself around everything placed there. Soon the quiet order of the funeral becomes something else. The heat rises. Smoke lifts, thick and dark, carrying the scent of burning wood and cloth and all that was meant to travel with the dead. The flames grow louder, shifting and crackling, taking in the careful arrangement without hesitation. What was deliberate and ordered becomes something wilder, though it is a wildness with purpose. The crowd watches. Some stand in silence. Others murmur prayers, or speak softly to the one who has gone, as if a few words might still reach across the rising sound. There are those who weep openly, and those who do not weep at all. Both are welcome here. Both belong. The fire does more than consume. It transforms. To the Norse, this is not simply the ending of a body. It is a release. The flames are not an enemy but a vessel, lifting the essence of the person upward, carrying them toward whatever waits. Smoke climbs into the sky, drifting past reach, taking with it the last trace of a life that was. There is no turning back now. The moment the fire takes hold, the boundary is crossed. The living stay behind, watching the dead move on, no longer present, no longer reachable, and yet not entirely gone. Fire does not hurry, and it does not falter. It works with a steady certainty, gently undoing what was once a person, until form gives way to warmth, and warmth gives way to absence. The crowd remains, because to leave early would feel wrong, and because no one wishes to be the one who missed the most meaningful part after standing through all the speeches. So they stay, and they watch. At first the flames are striking, tall, loud, almost theatrical. But as time passes, the spectacle settles into something quieter and more patient. The ship, if there is one, begins to fold inward. Its structure loosens. Wood splits and settles and falls. The carefully chosen objects, once emblems of who this person was, slip out of meaning as they darken and disappear into the same warmth. The form at the center is no longer distinct. And here something shifts. Until this point, the one who died has, in a sense, still been present, resting there, dressed, surrounded by their belongings, someone you could gesture toward and say, "There they are." But as the fire continues, that certainty softens. What remains is no longer a person, but a passage. A transformation, if one prefers the gentler word. The living respond in their own ways. Some stay fixed where they stand, gazing into the fire as though searching for something, a sign perhaps, or reassurance that all of this is working as it should. Others turn away, unable or unwilling to watch the final stages. There is no judgment in either. The ritual has done what it came to do, and what happens now is simply its close. Smoke keeps rising, carrying what cannot be held. And with that rising smoke comes belief. The idea that the person is not gone but travelling, that somewhere beyond sight, beyond flame and ash, they are arriving. Whether to Valhalla, the bright hall of the honoured, or to the quieter realm of Helheim, or to somewhere in between, depends on who they were, and perhaps on who is telling the story. In time, the fire begins to weaken. What was a powerful blaze becomes a bed of glowing embers, then dimmer still. The noise fades. The heat softens. In its place is only what remains, ash, fragments, the proof that something ended here. And the living are left with a final, quiet understanding. The person they knew is no longer here. Only memory remains. By the time the fire has spent itself, worn down from a roaring blaze to a low bed of stubborn embers, the crowd has thinned. The most patient stay, or perhaps the most dutiful. Either way, someone must tend to what is left, because even the most solemn farewell ends in a practical matter. Ash does not gather itself. The heat still lingers, but the work begins. Slowly, carefully, the remains are approached. There is no urgency now. The intensity of earlier has passed, replaced by something quieter and more methodical, the gathering of what survived the flames. And, perhaps surprisingly, some things do. Fragments of bone remain among the ash, pale and light. Twisted pieces of metal, sword hilts, brooches, buckles emerge, darkened but whole. Fire may transform, but it is not complete in its work. It leaves reminders behind. Enough to gather, enough to know, enough to say, this is what remains of the one who stood here. What was scattered is drawn back together, though in a form far from anything familiar. These remains are not cast aside, they are carried onward, in keeping with custom and standing. The gathered bones and ashes may be laid within a burial mound, an urn, or a marked place. The mound becomes a new point of focus, not for the dead, who are held to be gone, but for the living, who need somewhere to remember. Memory, unlike fire, requires a location. Stones may be set in place, markers raised. Now and then something more elaborate is built, especially if the one who died held importance in life. A simple mound can become a statement, just as the funeral was, not only that someone has died, but that someone worth remembering died here. And yet, even as this last arrangement is finished, there is a quiet understanding among those present. This is not truly for the dead. It is for the living, a place to return to speak beside, to stand near and imagine for a moment that the distance is not quite as absolute as it feels. The fire has taken the body, the ritual has sent the spirit onward, and what remains is something far more fragile, a memory anchored to the earth, held together by ash and stone, and the simple refusal to forget. With the ashes gathered, the mound raised, and the dead sent on their way, one might expect silence to follow, reflection, a long and thoughtful pause. Instead, the Norse eat. Because if there is one thing they understand beyond fire and ships and the occasional spirited voyage, it is that life continues. And little confirms that quite like a full table, the funeral feast begins. It is no contradiction. It is the final part of the rite. People gather once more, but now the tone has changed. The sharp edge of grief has softened into something warmer and more grounded. Fires burn again, though this time for cooking rather than for ceremony. Meat roasts. Bread is passed from hand to hand. Ale flows with a generosity that suggests restraint is not the evening's concern. To an outsider it might seem strange. feasting so soon after a death, laughter even, but this is not disrespect. It is recognition. The dead are gone. The stories return, freer now, less careful than before. The measured tone of the ceremony gives way to something more honest, or at least more entertaining. The one who died is remembered in detail. Victories swell. Failures turn amusing. Inconvenient truths drift quietly into the background. By the end of the night, the person may bear only a passing likeness to who they truly were, and no one objects. This is simply how memory works here. Cups are raised again, no longer in ritual but in rhythm, to the dead, to the gods, to life itself. Each drink is a small acknowledgement that the world has not ended, even if for a moment it felt as though it might. And beneath it all, something quieter is taking shape. Bonds are strengthened, alliances are renewed, promises are made, some sincere, some conveniently vague. What began as a farewell becomes, softly, a continuation of the community itself. Death has not weakened the gathering. If anything, it has drawn it closer, because a Norse funeral is never only about loss, it is about passage. The dead move on to wherever they are meant to go, to glory, to shadow, or to something between. The living stay behind, carrying forward what matters, reshaping what does not, and reminding themselves, perhaps a little uneasily, that one day this whole process will come around again. And when it does, they will hope for the same things they offered tonight: a good fire, a strong memory, and a feast worth attending.